What happens when an army's commanders realize the ground is lost, but the leader above them has promised victory forever?
And what if their retreat is shown publicly and quietly buried beneath the next wave of war news? Before we uncover why this moment still matters, tap like, subscribe for clear battlefield analysis, and share this video with someone who wants facts without the noise, because this was not a rumor, a leaked memo, or an enemy claim. Russia's military leadership accepted that holding Kherson had become too dangerous to continue.
And that admission exposed more than one lost city.
The moment came on November 9th, 2022, during one of the most important phases of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. General Sergei Surovikin, then commander of Russian forces in the war, sat across from Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. In a filmed exchange, Surovikin said Russian troops should leave the western bank of the Dnipro River. Shoigu approved the proposal. 2 days later, Ukrainian troops entered Kherson city. The only regional capital Russia had captured after February 2022 was back under Ukrainian control. Moscow called it a planned maneuver. The map called it a retreat. And maps are rarely sentimental. This was extraordinary because the Kremlin usually hides bad news behind vague language, delayed admissions, or total silence. Yet here was a senior commander explaining on Russian television why a major position could not be held. The scene looked transparent, but it was also political theater. Surovikin supplied the military logic. Shoigu gave formal approval. President Vladimir Putin remained outside the frame. That arrangement mattered.
Victory could still belong to the president, while retreat became a professional decision made by men in uniform.
The cameras did not reveal the whole truth. They revealed exactly where the Kremlin wanted responsibility placed. To understand why this retreat carried such weight, remember what Kherson represented. Russian troops seized the city early in the invasion, gaining their biggest bridgehead west of the Dnipro. From there, they threatened more of southern Ukraine and seemed positioned to push toward Mykolaiv, perhaps even Odessa.
Kherson also guarded routes leading toward Crimea, the peninsula Russia occupied and illegally annexed in 2014.
Losing the city was therefore not just a local setback. It damaged a larger strategic story. Moscow had claimed momentum, permanence, and control. Kherson exposed how quickly all three could disappear when supply lines came under pressure. Geography made the problem brutal. Most of Kherson city lies on the western, or right bank of the wide Dnipro River. Russia's main stores, reinforcements, and safer defensive areas were on the eastern bank.
Every shell, fuel truck, replacement soldier, and spare part had to cross a limited number of bridges or temporary routes.
That created a narrow logistical throat. Ukraine did not need to destroy every Russian unit directly. It needed to make those crossings unreliable. Once the bridges became dangerous, every Russian position west of the river lived on borrowed time, even if its trenches still looked strong. Ukrainian forces used precision strikes against bridges, ammunition sites, command posts, and transport nodes. The Antonivsky road bridge became a repeated target.
The nearby rail bridge and crossings around Novokakhovka were also threatened or damaged during the campaign.
Russia tried ferries, pontoons, repairs, and nighttime movement. Those efforts kept supplies flowing, but with growing risk and shrinking capacity. A bridge does not need to vanish completely to lose military value. If heavy vehicles cannot cross safely, schedules break. If schedules break, ammunition arrives late, wounded troops wait longer, and commanders lose confidence in every plan built around timely resupply. This is where the retreat becomes more than a headline. An army can hold ground while quietly losing the ability to sustain that ground. Soldiers may still occupy firing positions. Flags may still fly over buildings. Officers may still report that attacks were repelled. But beneath that visible layer, fuel stocks fall, vehicles wear down, and evacuation routes narrow. A force on the wrong side of a major river can turn from defender into trapped target with surprising speed. Surovikin's recommendation acknowledged that danger. He argued that preserving troops and moving to stronger lines outweighed the political value of Kherson. That does not mean the Russian army suddenly became honest, humane, or strategically brilliant. It means at least some commanders recognized a basic military reality. If they waited too long, Ukraine could break the crossings, isolate the western bank, and inflict a far more costly defeat. A controlled withdrawal offered a chance to save trained personnel, weapons, and units for later battles. In narrow tactical terms, that decision was rational. In political terms, it was humiliating.
Russia had staged illegal referendums in occupied regions only weeks earlier and declared Kherson part of Russia.
Then Russian forces abandoned the regional capital. This contradiction is the heart of the story. A government can announce that land has joined it forever, but an army cannot defend a slogan with empty fuel tanks. The Kremlin's language said permanence. The general's map said vulnerability. For a brief moment, the map won. That is why the televised conversation deserves another look.
It showed military necessity pushing through political fantasy, though only in a controlled and carefully managed form.
The retreat was not rebellion. No commander publicly challenged Putin. Yet the order carried an unspoken message. Moscow's promises could not change the hard facts beside the Dnipro. Strictly speaking, Surovikin recommended the withdrawal, and Shoigu approved it. That detail is important because dramatic titles can blur the chain of command. The generals did not overthrow civilian authority or refuse a direct order to stand.
Instead, Russia's military leadership presented retreat as the least damaging option, then received permission to execute it.
The deeper shock was not insubordination. It was the public admission that the campaign's political goals had collided with operational limits. A regime built on strength had to explain weakness, so it turned weakness into discipline, calling the loss a responsible move made to save lives. The presentation also protected the image of central power. Putin had personally celebrated the claimed annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions, including Kherson, in September 2022.
To appear weeks later an authorized departure from their main captured city would connect him directly to failure.
Instead, the decision appeared technical. Surovikin discussed supply difficulties and defensive logic. Shoigu listened, nodded, and agreed. The staging separated the president from the painful picture. This is common in authoritarian systems. Success rises toward the leader. Failure moves downward toward ministers, generals, local officials, or unnamed saboteurs. The retreat was real, but responsibility remained carefully distributed. Retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges offers a useful lens for understanding this. As a former commander of United States Army Europe, Hodges has repeatedly emphasized logistics, command structure, long-range strikes, and the strategic importance of Crimea in this war. His broader point is simple. Battles are not decided only where infantrymen exchange fire. They are decided by whether ammunition moves, headquarters communicate, bridges function, and leaders make timely choices. Kherson fits that framework almost perfectly.
Ukraine placed sustained pressure on the system behind Russia's front.
The visible advance came later. The invisible damage to Russian options came first, gradually. We should be careful not to place invented words in Hodges' mouth. The public record matters more than dramatic attribution. But his style of analysis helps explain why the event remains significant. He's often argued that Western observers focused too heavily on individual villages while missing logistics and operational reach. Kherson showed the danger of that narrow view. For weeks, the front line could appear slow.
Yet Ukrainian strikes were shaping a future decision by making Russian positions harder to feed and protect.
When the withdrawal finally came, it looked sudden only to people who had ignored the preparation. There were warning signs. Russian occupation authorities began moving civilians, often under coercive and frightening conditions, away from the Western Bank. Administrative offices shifted. Valuable equipment and records were removed. Russian flags disappeared from some buildings. Defensive works expanded across the river. Each sign could be dismissed alone as confusion or deception.
Together, they suggested preparation for departure.
Ukrainian leaders still had reason to remain cautious. A retreat announcement could hide an ambush and war reward suspicion. But when Russian units crossed and destroyed sections of access behind them, the strategic direction became clear. Moscow was giving up the bridgehead. So why does this receive less attention now? Because modern war floods the audience with constant urgency. One offensive replaces another. New weapons arrive. Commanders change. Front lines shift by kilometers, then meters. A major event can become old news within days, even when its lessons remain alive for years. Kherson was also complicated. Ukraine won the city without a single cinematic final battle in the center. Russia avoided total encirclement and saved much of its force. That makes the story harder to compress into triumph or disaster. Yet its ambiguity is exactly what makes the retreat worth studying now. If this breakdown is helping you see beyond daily headlines, pause for 1 second and leave a comment saying, "Maps follow logistics." It tells the algorithm that careful analysis still has an audience, and it helps more viewers find this story. Now look at what the order truly admitted. Russia was not merely changing positions, it was surrendering an operational goal that had shaped the southern campaign. The western bridgehead offered a possible route toward Mykolaiv and Odessa. Once abandoned, those ambitions became far harder. A defensive river replaced an offensive platform. The meaning of the entire southern front changed. Armies retreat for many reasons, and not every retreat proves strategic defeat.
Sometimes leaving exposed ground preserves strength and creates a better defense.
Russia achieved both on the eastern bank. The Dnipro became a massive natural obstacle between Ukrainian forces and Russian positions. Troops withdrawn from Kherson could be reassigned elsewhere. This is why serious analysis must hold two ideas at once. The retreat was a major Ukrainian success and a sensible Russian response to a worsening situation. Calling it sensible does not erase the failure that made it necessary. It simply explains why Moscow chose withdrawal over possible catastrophe.
The city itself mattered politically and emotionally.
Kherson residents had lived through months of occupation, repression, fear, and resistance. When Ukrainian troops arrived, crowds greeted them with flags, tears, and embraces. Those images challenged the Kremlin's claim that annexation reflected local wishes. People did not behave as if Russia had rescued them. They behaved as if an occupying force had left. That public reaction carried strategic power. Wars are contests over territory, but also over legitimacy. A government can falsify a referendum. It cannot easily manufacture the spontaneous relief of a crowd watching its own flag return to the square. Still, liberation did not end suffering. Russian forces remained across the river and later shelled Kherson repeatedly. Civilians faced damaged infrastructure, mines, power cuts, and the long trauma of occupation. This matters because maps can make war seem clean. A colored area changes hands, analysts call it progress, and attention moves elsewhere. Real people remain inside that color. They repair windows, search for missing relatives, avoid unexploded weapons, and wonder whether the next strike will reach their street. The retreat was strategically important, but its human meaning cannot be reduced to arrows, bridge ranges, or the pride of rival armies. For Russia, preserving forces softened the immediate military blow. Many units escaped before Ukraine could close the route. Equipment was removed, though not everything left the western bank cleanly. Defensive positions on the east were prepared in depth. This reduced Ukraine's chance of turning liberation into a rapid river crossing. The withdrawal, therefore, showed adaptation. Russian commanders had made disastrous choices earlier in the invasion, including overextended advances and vulnerable columns. At Kherson, they recognized danger and acted before complete collapse. Any opponent who learns even unevenly remains dangerous. Underestimating that ability would turn a real victory into false confidence. But adaptation has a price when it contradicts propaganda. The Kremlin had told Russians that the newly claimed territories were now part of their country. The constitution and ceremonies created an image of irreversible expansion. Then, the military left a regional capital without the grand battle those promises seemed to demand. State media tried to frame the move as concern for soldiers and civilians. That message had some logic, but it also raised an uncomfortable question. If Kherson was truly Russian forever, why had defending it become optional? No television set could fully remove the contradiction from viewers' minds afterward.
Propaganda rarely depends on perfect consistency. It depends on speed, emotion, and control of alternatives.
By labeling retreat a maneuver, officials shifted attention from what was lost to what was saved. By showing uniformed professionals making the choice, they gave the decision a technical appearance. By avoiding Putin's presence, they protected the symbol at the center of the system. And by quickly filling broadcasts with other stories, they shortened public memory. This does not mean every Russian believed the explanation. It means the state offered a safer vocabulary for discussing defeat without using the word defeat too openly at all. The retreat also revealed how centralized systems manage blame. When plans succeed, the leader's vision appears brilliant. When plans fail, subordinates become shields. Surovikin's role in the announcement may have made him look like the author of Retreat, even though the strategic disaster began long before his appointment as overall commander. He had inherited a vulnerable bridgehead in a campaign already under pressure. His recommendation likely prevented something worse for Russia. Yet systems do not always reward the person who delivers bad news. They may value loyalty, silence, and usefulness more than the accuracy of a general's battlefield judgment later. Surovikin's later fate adds another layer, though it should not be twisted into a simple revenge story. In January 2023, General Valery Gerasimov took direct command of the campaign, reducing Surovikin's position.
After the Wagner Rebellion in June 2023, Surovikin vanished from public view for a time amid questions about his knowledge of the mutiny.
He was later removed as head of Russia's aerospace forces, according to widely reported accounts. None of that proves he was punished specifically for Kherson. It does show how unstable senior command can become inside a system where military performance, politics, and personal survival overlap. The Wagner mutiny itself later exposed tensions that Kherson had only hinted at. Yevgeny Prigozhin attacked defense ministry leaders for incompetence and dishonesty, then sent armed forces toward Moscow before ending the rebellion. Kherson did not cause that event, and the two should not be merged. But both revealed strain between official narratives and battlefield realities. When truthful reporting is risky, problems travel upward slowly. When rivalry shapes command, resources can be wasted. When leaders fear blame, they may delay hard decisions. At Kherson, the system acted before disaster. The question is whether it can always do so in time. That question matters because military command is not merely about obedience. It is about delivering unwelcome information before it becomes fatal. A good commander must tell political leaders when an objective costs more than it is worth. A healthy government must be able to hear that message without treating realism as betrayal. Authoritarian systems can sometimes make fast decisions, but they can also punish candor and reward pleasing reports. The Kherson withdrawal suggests Russian leaders could accept reality under intense pressure. The broader war suggests they often accepted that reality only after enormous losses had already made denial impossible publicly. The first major lesson is logistical. Spectators naturally watch front lines because that is where movement appears. Professionals also watch roads, rails, bridges, depots, repair centers, fuel points, and medical routes. Destroying one tank removes one tank. Disrupting the supply network can weaken an entire group of tanks without touching each one. Ukraine's Kherson campaign demonstrated this indirect approach.
Precision weapons did not magically win the operation alone. Intelligence, local resistance, conventional pressure, air defense, engineering, and patient planning all mattered.
But accurate strikes on key nodes changed what Russia could safely maintain on the far side of the river. The second lesson is that terrain creates both opportunity and risk. Rivers protect defenders, but they can trap forces positioned on the wrong bank. Cities provide cover, but they consume supplies and create civilian burdens. Bridges enable offensives, but they also become predictable targets.
Commanders must constantly ask whether a position's tactical value exceeds its logistical cost.
In Kherson, that balance shifted over time. Russia's foothold once supported offensive ambition. Later, it became a pocket that demanded protection through damaged crossings. The ground had not moved. The relationship between firepower, distance, and supply had changed around it in decisive ways. The third lesson is about time. Ukraine did not need an immediate frontal assault into every Russian trench. It could create a worsening equation and allow pressure to work.
Each damaged crossing increased transport difficulty. Each threatened depot pushed supplies farther back.
Each command post forced to relocate slowed coordination. Eventually, the cost of staying exceeded the cost of leaving. This is often how operational success appears. It begins as a series of actions too small for dramatic headlines. Then the enemy makes one large decision that reveals their combined effect. The retreat was the receipt for months of pressure. The fourth lesson concerns restraint in interpretation.
Kherson did not prove Russia was about to collapse everywhere. It did not guarantee a quick Ukrainian path to Crimea.
It did not remove Russia's ability to mobilize troops, build defenses, or continue long-range attacks. In fact, Russian forces later entrenched heavily across the south, making further advances extremely difficult. Analysts who turned one victory into a promise of imminent total defeat misread the war. The correct conclusion was stronger and narrower. Ukraine could combine intelligence, precision, geography, and pressure to force Russia from land Moscow had called forever Russian in public. Send this video to one person who still thinks retreats happen only after soldiers start running. Then subscribe if you want more stories where one decision explains an entire campaign. The next point is crucial. Russia's withdrawal was orderly enough to preserve combat power, but that does not make it a hidden victory. A successful escape from a failing position is still evidence that the position failed. Confusing preservation with triumph allows propaganda to rewrite the map. The honest reading is balanced. Russia avoided a worse disaster. Ukraine achieved its objective. Both statements can be true at the same time. What does Kherson tell us about the war today? Not that another retreat is guaranteed, or that history repeats on command. It tells us what conditions make withdrawal more likely. Watch the supply network, not only the trench line. Watch whether bridges and railways function under fire. Watch whether headquarters move farther from the front. Watch whether occupation officials remove records, families, or equipment. Watch where new defensive lines appear. And listen carefully when official language shifts from conquest to protecting lives, improving positions, or shortening the front. Words do not prove retreat, but changing words often prepare audiences beforehand. The same method should be applied cautiously. Armies use deception. They build false positions, spread rumors, and move units for many reasons. A damaged bridge may be repaired. An evacuation may support defense rather than departure. A command post can relocate without changing the campaign's goal. Good analysis never treats one clue as certainty. It looks for patterns across logistics, terrain, force movement, official messaging, and enemy pressure. Kherson teaches us to connect those clues, not to turn every convoy into a prediction. The point is disciplined attention. Curiosity without evidence becomes rumor. Evidence without context becomes meaningless noise online.
Russia also learned from Kherson. It expanded defensive belts, dispersed some supply sites, increased electronic warfare, and adapted routes to reduce exposure.
None of these changes made its forces invulnerable. They did make later Ukrainian operations harder. This is another reason the 2022 retreat should not be frozen as a simple tale of Russian incompetence. Competence can exist inside a failed strategy. Soldiers can build strong defenses while leaders pursue unjust goals.
Commanders can make a sound withdrawal after earlier mistakes. Understanding an adversary requires seeing improvement as clearly as failure.
Respecting capability is not approval, it is basic seriousness. Ukraine learned as well. Kherson showed the power of striking support systems, but later conditions were different. Russia prepared deeper defenses, laid vast minefields, used drones more heavily, and complicated the effect of precision weapons. Western aid arrived with limits, delays, and political uncertainty. Ukraine also faced manpower and ammunition pressures of its own. A method that works brilliantly once cannot simply be copied forever. The enemy studies it. Technology changes. Terrain changes. The enduring principle is not one weapon or one bridge. It is the ability to identify the opponent's system, then pressure its weakest links. This is where Hodge's broader emphasis remains relevant. Long-range capability is not about dramatic explosions for their own sake. Its purpose is to make the enemy's rear area unsafe. Distance adds time. Time reduces responsiveness. Reduced responsiveness creates openings at the front. In southern Ukraine, the status of Crimea, the land corridor, ports, rail routes, and major headquarters all connect to this logic. But strategy also requires enough ammunition, intelligence, training, air defense, engineering, and political commitment. No single missile substitutes for the complete structure needed to exploit its effects fully. Western audiences often search for a wonder weapon because it makes war easier to imagine. Send the system, destroy that target, and victory follows. Kherson offers a more mature story. Weapons mattered, especially accurate fires, but their power came from how they supported a coherent plan. Intelligence identified valuable nodes. Operators struck them. Other forces maintained pressure. Russian commanders assessed the growing risk. Geography limited their alternatives. Politics delayed or complicated choices. Finally, the withdrawal order converted all those separate factors into a visible result. Strategy is rarely one dramatic act. It is many connected actions that narrow enemy choices. There's also a moral danger in admiring operational skill too much. The retreat involved armies, but the occupation involved civilians whose rights and safety had been violated. Reports after liberation documented detention sites, abuse, disappearances, and evidence investigated as war crimes. Any discussion of clever logistics must remember why those logistics existed. Russia had invaded a sovereign neighbor and was sustaining an occupation. Ukraine was fighting to restore its territory and protect its population. Analysis should explain military behavior without flattening the moral context. Clear thinking does not require false neutrality about the difference between invasion and self-defense. At the same time, honesty requires rejecting easy myths that help one side emotionally but weaken understanding. Russia's troops did not all flee in chaos. Ukraine did not destroy the entire force west of the river. The withdrawal did not end the Southern War. And the public recommendation was not a coup by rebellious generals. The event was impressive precisely without those exaggerations. Ukraine created conditions that made a major Russian position too risky.
Russian leaders admitted this and left. Kiev regained a vital city. Moscow protected many troops, but lost ground it had recently claimed would remain Russian forever.
Imagine the alternative. Suppose political pride had forced Russian units to stay. Ukraine could have continued attacking crossings and supply points while pressing the perimeter. A bridge failure, ammunition shortage, or breakthrough might have trapped thousands against the river. Russia could have faced mass surrender, abandoned equipment, and a far greater shock. This scenario was not certain, but it was plausible enough to drive the decision. The order to withdraw therefore measured fear, not panic, but professional fear of what the battlefield could become. Sometimes the clearest evidence of an opponent's success is the disaster their enemy chooses to avoid. That is why the word retreat should not be treated as a synonym for cowardice. Retreat can require discipline, planning, and painful honesty. The real failure may occur earlier, when leaders seize untenable ground, ignore logistical limits, or promise what their army cannot deliver. By November 2022, Russia's commanders were not choosing between victory and retreat. They were choosing between retreat and a serious risk of destruction. Once framed that way, the televised exchange looks different. The calm voices and formal phrases were covering a brutal fact. Ukraine had removed Russia's good options and left it choosing among bad ones. And this may be the most important lesson of Kherson. Power often looks strongest just before reality exposes its limits. A leader can hold ceremonies, redraw maps, and declare land eternal. A television studio can rename defeat.
A ministry can move blame from one desk to another, but trucks still need roads, armies still need bridges, soldiers still need ammunition.
Rivers still punish bad positions. And eventually, someone in command must face the map without slogans. Russia's generals did that at Kherson, and their retreat spoke louder than the annexation ceremony. Politics declared forever. Logistics answered, not one day longer.